Welcome, everyone, to this session on Infinite Campus, specifically using Infinite Campus to share student performance. In this session, we're going to kind of get our feet wet with the Infinite Campus gradebook. We're not going to take a deep dive and look at a specific gradebook, but we are going to understand the different components within Infinite Campus when we look at the evidence-based gradebooks. Now, it's worth noting on the bottom here, we can find a bit.ly link that is a bit.ly/EBG_Infinite Campus. It is case sensitive when you type that in. However, we do point this out because it is an important resource for you to have. You'll see throughout this presentation there are some simulations as well as some additional resources that you can access from this slides presentation. So when we look at today and what we're covering, it is about implementing the evidence-based grading gradebook in Infinite Campus. Now, we are going to be covering the configuration within Infinite Campus, not specifically the pedagogy that goes behind the scoring of the different skills and inputting those grades in the evidence-based gradebook. If you do have questions when it comes to the pedagogy behind this, please contact the instructional coach in your building. So today, specifically, there are 3 skills that we're looking at. The first one can be found underneath the success criteria, and that's being able to distinguish between professional skills and academic scoring. The second is that you can recognize the difference between practice, scrimmage, and game, and those 3 categories within the Infinite Campus gradebook, because we have to have an understanding of how those categories contribute to the power law and most recent scoring systems, which brings us to the third success criteria, which is recognizing the difference and the use of power law and most recent within the gradebook. The first thing we're going to look at are the changes that impact everyone, right? Because in secondary, there are parts of this that might affect one person's gradebook, but not someone else's. But we're going to start with things that do affect everyone, no matter what you're teaching. The first thing being the grade marks and GPA. So we want the traditional scale and the evidence-based gradebook scale to look the same. So I'm just going to read off this slide here. In an effort to ensure that GPA calculations are the same for the evidence-based classroom and the traditional classroom, the minus and plus grades will no longer be used. So instead of an A- or B+, it's going to be an A/B and B/C. This change is outlined on the table to the right. So you can see the traditional and the evidence-based gradebook scale are the same as far as the grade marks. So we have A, A/B, B, B/C, and then C, D, and F. It is worth noting, as we will note a few times throughout this presentation, that there is no longer a C/D. If you used standards-based grading last year, the shift this year is just going to be a C, a D, and an F, and that will give us a clearer calculation for the GPA when the end of the semester does come along. Now we can take a look at what this grading scale means with percentages. So you can see that the letter grade of an A, the minimum percentage is 93%, but we really want to highlight that A/B means a minimum percentage of 87%. And then it continues on down the list. And this can be a really helpful resource, not just for teachers, but for families that have questions about what the different grade marks mean. We're going to take a look at the professional skills versus academic skills. It's worth noting that every teacher is going to be assessing professional skills, whether you have a traditional-based gradebook or an evidence-based gradebook. Professional skills will be assessed for every class. So when we look at professional skills, there are a few things that we want to put an emphasis on. And you can find that by navigating through these arrows. The first being the categories. The categories have different weights. Therefore, we recommend using the game category for any assignment that is scored in the professional skills. If you use the practice category, the weight of 0 will result in a no calculation for the in-progress grade. Next, we're going to take a look at the grading scale. Instead of letters, it's going to be numbers for professional skills. So we have 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then finally, we're looking at the posted or in-progress grade. That is going to be calculated by the most recent grade in the gradebook. When we look at academic skills, we see a few differences. With academic skills, we are going to assess and score those skills using letters. So it's going to be A/B, B/C, etc. Just a reminder that there is no C/D on this grading scale. When looking at the in-progress grade or the posted grade, that is being calculated by the power law. So instead of most recent, like the professional skills, academic skills are calculated by the power law, which we will take a deeper look into. However, one key component of the power law grade calculation is having consistent entries in either the scrimmage or game category. Here you can get some additional resources to differentiate between the professional skills and academic skills. We're going to hop into categories and take a look at the differences between practice, scrimmage, and game. As you can see, these three categories are preloaded in your gradebooks. Each category carries a different weight that cannot be changed. Again, this is preset by the district. There's practice, which has a weight of 0, scrimmage, which has a weight of 5, and game, which has a weight of 95. When scoring in the practice section, we are going to use flags. If you're unfamiliar with what flags are, you may be more familiar with entering them in manually by typing in an M or an I in the gradebook. That is the same thing as going through this flag drop-down graphic you see on the right and manually selecting a flag. Either way will work. So we're going to take a look at the three different marks here for the practice category. There's an M, which indicates that the student did not attempt or barely attempted the practice. An I, which indicates that the student attempted some of the practice. And a T, which indicates that the student attempted or completed the practice. The difference between the scrimmage and game category when compared with practice is the grade entry. So within the scrimmage and game categories, we're going to be entering in scores based on the skill rubric being used, which is an A/B, B/C, etc. In order to get an accurate score for the power law calculation, at least one score must be entered weekly into the scrimmage or game category. You can see an example of this in the graphic to the right. If grades are not entered in regular intervals, it will give you an inaccurate grade calculation for those students. You can find additional resources by clicking on the links on this slide. Wrapping things up, we're going to take a look at most recent versus power law. Again, most recent is going to be found when we assess the professional skills. This first image shows an example of a correct input using the most recent grade calculation. We can see that the teacher put in a grade for September 14th in the game category. Therefore, the in-progress grade shows up as a 3. Whereas in the bottom image, this teacher was using the practice category and does not get an in-progress grade. That's because the practice category is weighted at 0. So please put all your professional skill assignments in under the game category. Next, we're going to watch this video as it will highlight some of the key components and key aspects of the power law calculation.
The power law method of estimating student proficiency is based on recent scholarship and research into how people learn. The power law calculated proficiency estimate represents where the student's proficiency is based on the trend of their performance. To help explain the power law calculation process, meet Pete. Pete is a student in your advanced statistics course. We're going to use 4 of his scores on assignments aligned to standard X in that course. What's the fairest way to express Pete's proficiency on this standard as of right now, after the 4th assignment has been submitted and scored? One option would be to average his 4 assignment scores together. His average score is 2.5. It is a valid representation of all 4 of his scores, but is it representative of Pete's proficiency on this standard right now? His most recent scores are both above the average, so it probably isn't fair to average the 4 scores together and use that to represent Pete's current level of proficiency. We could take his most recent score and use that, since we know this is the most recent data. But does it represent his overall learning, or did he have a good day and did better than expected? What if he had been up late the night before and had scored a 2 rather than a 4 on the assignment? What is the expected score for him? How do we know where he could be performing right now? Enter the power law. Power law proficiency estimates are based on the learning curve concept. In the learning curve, the rate of learning is rapid as new knowledge is acquired at the beginning of learning a topic or specific standard. As the skill or concept is practiced more and more, learning still increases, but at a less rapid rate, so it creates a true curve if you were to graph it. The power law calculation estimates the proficiency trend score by first using the student's past scores to determine the student's learning curve. This curve is then used to estimate what is the student's current proficiency. In short, it takes the trend of the student's scores and takes into account the growth of the student in learning. This process is based on the number of scores aligned to the standard, the student's score on each assignment, and the interval between each assignment. In order to accurately determine the curve, at least 3 assignments with due dates at equal intervals should be used. Here's why having at least 3 data points over that time span is important. Let's say I gave you an altimeter as you boarded an airplane, and I was going to use just the altitude data to determine where your flight went. I'd want to have a wide sampling of data over the course of your entire flight. If I only took measurements during takeoff, I could conclude your altitude continued to increase at that rate over the entire flight, meaning your final destination was somewhere in orbit. If I only used the altitude in the middle of your flight, I could conclude you were on the top of a very tall mountain. But if I look at your altitude over the course of the entire flight, I can see that your altitude increased rapidly at the beginning, then leveled off, then descended again. Just like taking measurements over the entire flight would give me the most accurate results, using more than 3 assignments with due dates at equal intervals is key to using the power law effectively. In order to calculate the power law trend, the rubric score is converted to a numeric value. The district or school defines the numeric value used in the power law calculation as part of the setup in campus for the rubric. Since the trend value shows student proficiency and is the result of the power law calculation, it isn't capped to match the highest score on the associated rubric. But having too high of a proficiency estimate, one that's well above the maximum rubric value, that may indicate the power law curve is being skewed, either due to an insufficient number of assignments or other factors. If this is the case, the power law method may not be the best indicator of the student's proficiency.
Finally, when we look at the power law, we do have some examples here of just the different trends. The first example gives you an example of the trend line where it kind of looks like the average of the grades, but really it's the trend line between those 4 scores. The bottom one is a more drastic example where the student basically goes from a 2 to a 3.2 throughout the 4 assignments. And you can see where that calculated score ends based on the trend line. Finally, so these are some of the key points to remember between most recent and power law. With most recent, it's in the professional skills area of your gradebook. It's only going to be a number, so 1, 2, 3, or 4. It calculates based on the most recent score entered, and again, you have to use that game category. Whereas with power law, it's going to be found in the academic skills area of your gradebook. It's going to be based on the A/B, B rubric. It calculates score based on the student performance trend, which we just saw on the previous slide. And the weights are scrimmage at 5 and game at 95. And those 2 categories are used to calculate the grade. And finally, and this is very important, grades must be entered consistently in order to get an accurate grade. You can find additional resources here, such as the video that we just watched. If you have any questions, please contact your tech integrator or reach out to your instructional coach. And last but not least, you can also contact the content specialist. Now that the video is over, you can type in this bit.ly and it will make a copy of these slides where you can go through at your own pace and access the resources.